So this is interesting. This is a student at Yale asking Ben Shapiro just a few days ago whether using the argument of being indigenous to a land is the most supreme argument that you can use. And he questions it and challenges it. It's often heard in regard to the Israeli-Arab conflict. Jews will say they're indigenous. Arabs will attempt to make such a claim. This is what Ben says. Let's hear the question first, and then you can see Ben's response, and then I'll give you my thoughts on this issue of what is the strongest claim one can make to the land.
Question is regarding the concept of indigeneity, often being used, or being indigenous to a particular land being used as claim, often by the left, for a people to have a legitimate reason to occupy a territory or a piece of land. Just this morning, I saw a post saying that today is actually not about, a post by a pro-Palestinian organization, about how today is not actually about October 7th, 2023, but rather about the Nakba that happened in 1947. I'm thinking, okay, if we're going to go back to 1947, then why not go back to, the 7th century AD, when it was conquered by Muslim conquest, or if we even go back further, like 2,000 years ago, when they were banished from this region. And so I just wanted to hear your view on what you think the importance, or how important it is to even have indigeneity as a concept when discussing ownership or claim to a land. How should we understand it? Or if we do use it, how far back should we go?
So, as you say, I think indigeneity tends to be much more of a, there's sort of internal claims and there's external claims. So internal claims, this is our land, this is the land that unifies us. Those are common and those exist across the world, and there's nothing new about that. As sort of an external justifying claim, indigeneity tends to be a very weak response. And it tends to be a response, by the way. It doesn't tend to be the initial claim. It's not, I ought to have this land because my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather had this land. We tend to perceive that as a very weak claim. We ought to perceive that as a very weak claim. It tends to be only used in the context of a counter historical claim, right? Somebody will say, well, I ought to have this land because my grandfather had this land. And somebody says, well, your grandfather he got it from my great grandfather, right? And so it's more of a counterclaim. The sort of historic game playing here elides the central issue. Okay, so when I'm trying to simplify the Israeli-Palestinian issue, there's a very easy way to do this. Okay, the very easy way to do this is, would the world look better if it looked more like Israel, or would it look better if it looked more like, say, the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, or the Gaza Strip under Hamas? Okay, that's a very, very simple question, and it's a very easy question to answer, and nobody wants to answer it. So instead, there's obfuscation. Instead, you get people who are saying things like, well, it's really about what happened in 1947, and it's really what happened, during the Ottoman Empire, and it's really what happened if you go all the way back to when this land was occupied by the Crusaders. You can do that all day long. You really can. And it doesn't actually prove anything or help anything particularly. Again, if you want to go back originally, according to the Bible, it was Canaanite. And if you want to go back to, most of the archaeology in Israel dates to, about the 2nd century BC when it was Jewish. So this is a particularly weak claim. And we all know it's a weak claim, by the way, because nobody at Yale is proposing to give up the beautiful university to the Native American tribes who originally possessed this land, obviously. That sort of claim is, I think, a misdirect. I think it's a red herring. And I think that the people who use it definitely know that it's a red herring in order to avoid the obvious, which is everyone in the world would prefer to, by the way, including Arabs. Israeli Arabs are perfectly happy living in Israel, and none of them want to leave and live in the Gaza Strip or in the areas of Judea and Samaria known as the West Bank. No, nobody wants that.
Thank you.
So this is really interesting because we do actually see some people in the pro-Israel community that will often speak about the fact that Jews are indigenous to the land. And I do think it is worth saying, but I think Ben is right in saying that it can't be the only argument that is used. Now, I want to talk to you about what some of those arguments are that I think gives Israel clearly the strongest claim. But the one thing I would say to Ben in response is he was saying, the only question we should be asking is who will provide the better quality of life. I do hear that. But then again, one could respond by saying, well, ultimately, if this is our land, if it's legally, morally our land, you say we won't provide a better quality of life, but it's ours, it's ours. So the real question in my mind comes down to whether there is actually a genuine case for Palestinian nationalism. whether that really is genuine. And it seems to me that the case of history, both recent and over the past century, shows that there is no genuine, sincere desire for Palestinian self-determination. The founding charters said that they consider themselves an inseparable part of the Arab people, Arab nation, which has more than 20 states and another 20 or so Muslim countries which share the same faith. So you've got that, and I don't think that the Palestinian leaders, both past and present, would have any issue being part of some greater Arab empire being taken over by another Arab country. In fact, in 48, what the plan was Jordan and Egypt and Lebanon, Syria, they were all going to take chunks out of the land once they had wiped out the Jews and killed off the Jewish state. There'd be no Palestinian state there. There was no great call for Palestinian self-determination when Jordan and Egypt controlled Judea and Samaria and Gaza. No, it seems that the whole cause is entirely focused around Jew hatred. And that's not a legitimate form of nationalism, where all it is just about we want to get rid of the Jews. That's what Nazism was, and it certainly wasn't legitimate. So I think that's how I would respond if someone said, well, I don't care about quality of life. The question is who has the rights to the land. And therefore, then I do actually think that Ben's next point comes into play. It's a relevant question. Who actually is a blessing, provides blessing? Which society provides blessing, stability, prosperity? It's a relevant question to ask at that point, given that you're not dealing with equally valid or competing nationalism. I think Ben also has a point in saying that, even if there was an equally valid competing nationalism, if they were creating society that was so evil, that was so bad, maybe the badness of that would trump any valid nationalist claims they may have. But this really then comes down to what really gives the Jews the claim, because ultimately, I don't think it will cut it to simply say, well, we'll provide a better quality of life if people still keep saying, well, you have no right to be there, you're foreign occupiers. So I do think it is worth noting that Jews do come from that land. When people say, what are you doing here? It is worth noting, it might not be the strongest argument of the fact that we're indigenous to the land, but I don't think it should be dismissed or ignored, especially given that there has been no other sovereign state that's been set up in that land before Israel's re-establishment and since the prior Jewish kingdom that exists there 2,000 years ago, which the Romans dismantled, forcefully exiled the Jews, and they constantly wished to return there, prayed 3 times a day. And so I think that's important to bear in mind, very much so. I think the second thing to bear in mind is that according to the law, modern law, international law, established over the past 100 years, it is so clear that the land belongs to the Jewish people. This was what the League of Nations said. They established the whole territory, including Judea and Samaria and Gaza, assigned it in international law, the League of Nations San Remo Conference. And then there are legal principles in international law, which we've heard Natasha Hausdorff, an international lawyer, speak about, where she explains that when let's say, an imperial nation or whatever has a plot of territory and they leave it or desert it or hand it over to someone else, whatever that territory was, whatever the borders of that was, then the precedent is that then becomes the borders of whichever new country claims sovereignty there, and so or has the second greatest claim once the other side has left, once the British left. And so that's another really important thing to bear in mind. And also all the issues of displacement that the Arab side laments. None of those happened because Israel and the Jews sort of were there and they said, right, we're coming, we're kicking everyone out. No, what happened was there were Jews living there, there were Arabs living there. And the United Nations said, when the British handed it over to the UN, said, right, well, we're going to split the land because there are Jews living here and Arabs living here, and there's a strong case for a Jewish state being established, and there's never been an Arab state here, but okay, we understand that Arabs might prefer to live under an Arab governance or whatever, so we'll split it, and we'll have Jews living in the Arab one and Arabs living in the Jewish one. And the Jews said fine. And then the Arabs went to war against the Jews to try and kill them. And they told many of the Arab citizens, leave and come back once we've thrown the Jews into the sea. Of course, that didn't happen. And the Jews, in fighting this war, fighting a defensive war, they conquered these territories. And the displacement, as I say, that occurred is entirely self-inflicted by people that had an anti-Semitic ideology. So you lost the war, you tried to kill us, and you got displaced, and now it's our fault? Just doesn't make sense. So the case of law, international law, point of it about indigeneity, the point about who will provide a better quality of life, all these things I think are important and it's worth noting. However, what's ultimately going to resolve this? That really is the key question. What will ultimately resolve this? I'm not so sure any of those arguments will cut it. In the Middle East, there's two things that are respected. Number one is people that number one is having uncompromising strength. So, yes, to Ben's point, maybe they should say we're not compromising, we're not indulging in a Palestinian state which is just going to become another terror state like Gaza. We absolutely cannot do that. You've shown you're not genuinely interested in nationalism because you've had numerous times to agree to a two-state solution. And so we're just going to show uncompromising strength. And we actually see that when Israel shows uncompromising strength, the Arabs respect it. There were all these memes celebrating Netanyahu when he got Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader. They respect strength, and we might be surprised actually at what could happen when Israel starts to become uncompromising. But the second thing they respect with regard to this argument of whose right is to the land, the second thing they respect in the Middle East is invoking the name of God. And that is something that is so clear that the destiny of this conflict and the world, it's pushing the Jewish people towards, to really coming into their spiritual destiny as God's nation. Now, when I say this, some people get so upset. They say, we're all God's children. Of course we are. Of course we're all creation of God. You know, we have a holy people within a holy people in the Jewish people called the Kohanim, the high priests. And you don't have anti-Kohanism in the Jewish people. We're not upset, but how can you say they're the Holy of Holies? These are people that were designated for a specific role. But if you're alive, that means you also have a specific role. We're all partners in building a dwelling place for God in this world. And yes, he did choose the Jewish people to be his emissaries of teaching his vision for the world that he wants to dwell in. And that's a wonderful thing. There's a world in which there can be people that can bring down the light, and then people that can and transmit it, and then people that can receive it. We all have a role to play in this story of creation. It's the most well-known fact anyway. The Jewish people were chosen by God to bring his vision of the kind of world he wants to the whole world, and to be that. And that's what they respect in the Middle East. They respect people who invoke the name of God. Allahu Akbar, they say it the whole time. And if the Jewish people we start justifying our right to be there in that land, with that kind of religious argument, that godly argument, I think that we will turn the tables. People think, oh, they're not going to buy it, or you can't say it, or it's ridiculous. Sometimes we're living too much in a Western mindset when we say that. Rashi, the most famous Torah commentator, his first comment on the Torah, as he says, why does God start with the creation of the world? Why not start with the first commandment? He says, because first we have to establish who God is, that he's the creator of the world, because in the future, the nations of the world are going to say to the Jews, you're foreign occupiers of the land of Israel. Therefore, you have no right to be there. And he says, and the Jews will respond and say, God is the creator of heaven and earth, and he assigned this land for us. It's the first thing. That's what this whole thing seems to be pushing us towards, stating and telling the world why we're here. It seems to me so obvious that this is what we're being pushed towards, when that's the kind of language they respect in the Middle East. So I think above all else, it seems people are scared to say it, talking too much in Western secularist language. But I think actually bringing in the godly argument is the most important of them all. And frankly, the majority of the world worships the God of Abraham. The majority of the world now really knows this anyway. I think they're just waiting for us to confirm it. So let's say it. If you've made it so far in this video, I have a request for you. JTV has been having a really big impact in spreading the truth about Israel and creating positive associations with the Jewish people, Judaism, and Israel. We've really grown a lot, particularly in the last year, and we're having a really significant impact, both for Jews and non-Jews. But I really want to take JTV to the next level so we can start to compete with the other big online media beasts that are often peddling anti-Israel content. And the way we're going to do that is to scale even faster. So I'd love to build a team where we have other presenters doing shows like me, let's start doing documentaries, supplementary content, animated content, etc., etc. And to do that, I'd like to build a bit of a team. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one fundraising day, just one, where we try and build up some funding in order to fund such a team. Now, to do that, it's going to obviously require people to get involved. And I'm wondering if you would consider, if you're watching JTV content and appreciate what we do and want to help partner with us in taking this to the next level and spreading the truth farther and wider than ever before, I wonder if you'd consider partnering with us simply by running a mini page on the fundraiser that we do, where you just reach out to your contacts on that day that we choose to fundraise and see if they'll all chip in. If you'd be up for doing that, of which I would be so grateful, then please click on the Google form link in the video description of this video, where you can simply just put in a few contact details. It'll be a very small commitment, as I say, literally just one day that we'll all agree upon as a collective community. But the impact is going to be so big. There's such strength in numbers. If we all pull together and do this, we can take this to the next level. And as I say, all of us can partner together in bringing and spreading the truth to the whole world. So please do consider clicking on that link, filling in the form, and I'll be in touch very soon to talk about the next steps. Small commitment, but a big impact. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.